Hey guys, it is Alex Honored, and tonight we're going to be talking about philosophy and mindset. Tonight I'm going to be sharing a concept that I learned from Grandmaster Scott Conway. And it's a concept of self discipline broken down into a more applicable, a more understandable concept that allows you to really get clear on what aspect of self discipline you're struggling with and how to be able to achieve your goals. So a lot of time when we talk about self-discipline, we're using it as a generic term, but there's actually four different types of self-discipline that we're going to be sharing or talking about tonight. And the first is actually self-discipline. Self-discipline is getting yourself to do what you know you're supposed to be doing. Self-control, which is the next one, self-control is not doing what you know you should not do. So we're going to start off looking at these two concepts. It's out of everything that you have, that's based upon your morals, your ethics, your background, who you are, what you know, the knowledge you've acquired, the environments that you're in. There's kind of this line between what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And you know what you should do and you know what you shouldn't do. And the idea for self-discipline is getting yourself to do the things that you know you should. Relatively simple. The idea of self control is getting yourself to not do the things that you know you shouldn't. So, like health and fitness, exercise is important. So, exercising on a daily basis. What the exercise is gets into more specifics. But if you just exercise on a daily basis, get your body moving, that's something that you know you should do. Self discipline is making sure that you make the time and you do that activity. Self control is not eating ho hos and ding dongs, or not eating junk food, not eating a bunch of stuff that you know is just not good for your health. It's processed, it's overly caloric, it doesn't actually serve a lot of health benefits. Now, if you're doing it from an emotional perspective, you're giving yourself a treat, different piece. We're not talking about that, but just the general concept. You know you shouldn't be eating it, so don't eat it. The idea of self discipline is doing the things you know you should, self control, not doing the things you know you shouldn't. The challenge is there's actually a lot of things that you should and should not do, enough so that there's probably not enough time to do or not do all of them. So the next aspect that we're going to talk to, this is the third. The third is self-leadership. It's giving yourself clear, concise instruction as to which of the things that you should be doing are you going to focus your energy on, and which of the things that you should not be doing are you going to put your intention to not do. The last one is self submission. Self submission is following your instruction. Now, I'm going to play this out in kind of a health and fitness way because it's an easy way to understand it. Let's say, for instance, you go out and you get some food and you eat some food that's just absolutely horrible for you. And the next day you're beating yourself up. You're like, God, I ate that food and I really shouldn't have eaten it. Well, first off, that's a challenge of self control. You know you shouldn't have eaten it, but you did. But really, it's also an issue that most likely of self leadership. Did you clearly define what your diet or nutrition was? When you went to the restaurant, did you set a clear expectation for yourself as to what you wanted to do or what your outcome was? You know, if you're going to go eat this food that you know you shouldn't eat, then perhaps do it and enjoy it and give yourself permission to eat the food that you shouldn't eat, but don't let it become a habit. You see, the self leadership gives you permission to be able to do some leeway in that whole self discipline and self control and tells you where you should be spending your effort in self control and self discipline. Self submission, now, in the building of like King Solomon's temple, they had the architect and the guy who sat down and he wrote all the designs on the truss board and he left it there. And then the workers would come the next day, they'd look at the designs and they'd go build it. So the idea of self submission is actually doing what you say to do. And so if you give yourself a control or like a command, if you give yourself a leadership instruction, tomorrow I'm going to be doing a water fast. And you tell yourself, I'm going to do a water fast. I'm going to drink nothing but water. I'm not going to eat anything. I'm going to do water all day. The next day, sitting and going, okay, well, yeah, I'll give yourself permission not to. That's not really solid leadership. Like, leadership is giving clear instruction, holding boundaries, enforcing. So, are you being a good leader to yourself? Second, are you submitting to yourself? Are you submitting to your leadership? It's hard to submit to a leader who's constantly beating you up, tearing you down, isn't giving you clear instructions. So, the self leadership and the self submission go hand in hand, because in order to submit to yourself, in order to follow the instructions you're giving yourself, you need to be a good leader. And as a good leader, that means you need to give clear, concise instructions, and you need to treat your followers with love and respect. So that means you got to learn to give that to yourself. So today, what we're talking about in the mindset and philosophy is a way to break down what you're working on. As you're working on your goals, you're working your ambitions, working on these things you want to achieve, we're looking at the four aspects of self-discipline. Self-discipline, doing the things you know you should do. Self-control, not doing the things you know you shouldn't. Self-leadership, telling yourself what you should do or what you're going to do or not do. And self-submission, following your instructions. So each day for the next week or so, why don't you take the time and rank yourself, self-control, self-discipline, self-leadership, self-submission, on a score of 1 to 10. And each day just kind of see, how am I doing? And evaluate and start to see, where do I need to spend more time? Do I need to become a better leader? Do I need to study leadership on how to lead myself and how to be more effective? Do I need to practice submitting? Do I need to have the ability to slow down and do a little bit less so that I can build the momentum of self-control and self-discipline? These are ideas and concepts, but you don't know if you're not measuring it. So take the time over the next week, measure yourself, score 1 to 10 in self-discipline, self-control, self-leadership, and self-submission, and see how it goes. Anyway, I hope you guys have an amazing day. Remember, reality isn't fact, reality isn't real. Reality is what you make it. Make it a great day. Bye for now, everybody.